Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar, Land Rover, Mini. These legendary names together formed one of the brightest constellations in the history of the world's auto industry. They were the pride of the empire on which the sun never sets, the pinnacle of Made in Britain. However, when we peel back the mists of history, what we see is a heartbreaking story of decline. How did this former king step down from its throne, step by step, ultimately surrendering its own crown? Today, let's explore the cautionary tale of the British auto industry's decline. The story begins in an era of post-war reconstruction. The decade after World War II was a brief and brilliant golden age for the British auto industry. As its continental European rivals Germany and France had their factories destroyed in the war and were slow to rebuild, Britain, with its relatively intact industrial system, gained a precious window of opportunity. By 1950, British car production was second in the world, surpassed only by the United States. A staggering 75% of its private cars were exported, at one point accounting for half of the world's total car exports. Among these, the Morris Minor, born in 1948, was a hero of its time. Designed by the legendary Alec Isigonis, who would later create the Mini, it was economical, durable, and the first British car to sell over 1 million units. Alongside the high-performance Land Rover, which was exported to over 70 countries, it carried the national will of export or die, marching majestically into the world under the protection of the Commonwealth preference system. This reciprocal tariff system gave British cars a huge advantage in markets like Canada and Australia, creating a natural trade barrier, but it also sowed the seeds of over-reliance on protectionism. However, beneath the glory, a crisis was already lurking. As the world began to embrace mass assembly line production, many British carmakers remained infatuated with the aristocratic tradition of handcrafted manufacturing. This culture was unparalleled for creating top-tier luxury cars, but it made them out of step when facing the mass market. More fatally, when the oil crisis hit and fuel-efficient Japanese cars swept the globe, British car companies stubbornly clung to their gas-guzzling traditional models, slow to react to market changes. If a conservative culture was a slow poison, then a series of vacillating government policies acted as a catalyst for accelerated decline. As early as the 19th century, the absurd Red Flag Act required a person to walk ahead of a moving vehicle with a red flag, causing the British auto industry to waste a precious 30 years at its inception. In the modern era, the policy chaos intensified. From 1952 to 1973, the hire purchase laws designed to stimulate consumption were amended 18 times, causing domestic demand to fluctuate wildly and preventing car companies from establishing stable production. Even more disastrous was the forced merger in 1968, led by the Labour government under the Big is Beautiful philosophy. About 35 brands, including Jaguar, Land Rover, Mini, and Rover, were forcibly cobbled together to form the British Leyland Motor Corporation. This behemoth, far from creating synergy, quickly fell into continuous losses due to its multitude of internal brands, severe factionalism, chaotic management, and constant infighting. It was nationalized in 1975. But the final straw that broke the camel's back came from within the factories, destructive industrial relations. In the 60s and 70s, powerful trade unions virtually controlled the lifeline of production. They abused the piecework system, frequently launching unofficial wildcat strikes over minor pay changes. At Leyland's Cowley plant, disputes over piece work rates led to a loss of 50,000 cars in a single year. Production schedules became meaningless, and efficiency was abysmal. Even more terrifying, the unions fiercely resisted any new technology and management methods. When Japan's lean production and automation technologies began to emerge, British unions saw them as a monstrous threat, fearing they would reduce jobs and weaken the union's power. The endless infighting directly led to a complete collapse of product competitiveness. Next, let's witness a product showdown from the 70s. This is British Leyland's Austin Allegro, with its bloated styling and an awkward square steering wheel that became the laughingstock of Europe. Its hydrogas suspension system was also notorious for frequent leaks. And this is its sibling, the Morris Marina, which rushed to market using a plethora of outdated technology. Due to severe structural corrosion issues, many of these cars rusted through and were scrapped within a few years. And their rivals? This is the Volkswagen Golf, whose clean, practical design defined an era. This is the Honda Civic, which achieved legendary status during the oil crisis for its outstanding fuel economy. In terms of design, reliability, fuel efficiency, and cost, British cars were completely crushed. Shoddy workmanship and frequent breakdowns became the indelible label of British cars of that era. By 1979, British Leyland's domestic market share had plummeted below 20%. By the late 70s, Britain was mired in the British disease. In 1979, the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, came to power and initiated a series of radical reforms. On one hand, she began to dismantle and sell off the debt-ridden Rover Group. On the other, she turned her attention to efficient Japanese manufacturers, hoping to introduce a catfish to stir the stagnant waters. The Thatcher government offered extremely generous terms to carmakers like Nissan. For Nissan, the government promised aid of up to £124 million and offered substantial land and tax incentives. The core attraction of all this was Britain's membership in the European Economic Community, which could provide a Trojan horse for Japanese cars to bypass tariffs and directly enter the vast European market. Once the gates of privatization were opened, the fate of British car brands began a long and rootless journey, like duckweed on water. In 1994, Germany's BMW acquired the Rover Group for £800 million. What should have been a powerful alliance ultimately turned into a disaster. BMW attempted to revive the Rover brand, launching the well-received Rover 75. But the fatal mistake was prioritizing this niche flagship model while failing to invest in updating the volume-selling, lower-end models. Continuous huge losses and cultural clashes between German management and the British team became unbearable for BMW. But amidst these ruins, BMW discovered a diamond in the rough: the Mini. They firmly rejected the plan to make the new generation Mini another cheap small car. Instead, they astutely repositioned it as the first premium small car, a fashion icon filled with driving pleasure. BMW invested heavily, retaining the classic design elements while infusing it with BMW-level driving dynamics and quality, successfully transforming the Mini into a global trendsetter. In 2000, an impatient BMW decided to dismember the Rover Group. The Land Rover brand was sold to Ford for a high price of £1.8 billion. The promising Mini was kept by BMW itself, and the remaining Rover and MG brands were sold off for a symbolic price of £10 to a British consortium. From this point on, the map of the British auto industry was completely redrawn. After being sold by Ford to India's Tata Motors in 2008, Jaguar and Land Rover received stable financial backing and maintained their British character, ultimately achieving a brand revival. Meanwhile, the independent MG Rover Group, lacking R&D funds, struggled for 5 years before declaring bankruptcy in 2005, marking the tragic end of British mass-market car manufacturing. Ironically, the MG brand was eventually reborn under Chinese ownership, while the Rover brand evolved into ROV. The bloodline continues, but it's no longer the same. After the decline of its native brands, Britain's automotive manufacturing industry was transformed under foreign ownership, becoming a global manufacturing base oriented towards Europe. However, in 2020, the UK officially Brexited, and a new storm arrived. Supply chain disruptions and tariff barriers reappeared. In particular, the rules of origin in the UK-EU trade agreement posed a severe challenge to the British electric vehicle industry, which is highly dependent on imported batteries. If localization ratios are not met, EVs exported to the EU will face a 10% tariff. Honda closed its Swindon plant, while Jaguar, Land Rover, and BMW also issued warnings. The uncertainty brought by Brexit is shaking the foundations of these foreign giants in the UK. Facing the risk of being marginalized by the global wave of electrification, the British government has once again stepped in, launching a new industrial defense battle. In the face of this challenge, the British government's response has been dramatically inconsistent. The deadline for banning the sale of petrol and diesel cars was first aggressively moved up from 2040 to 2030, only to be pushed back to 2035 and 2023 by the Rishi Sunak government, citing the need to ease the burden on the public. However, the newly elected Labour government in 2024 pulled it back to 2030 again. This policy tug-of-war has not only left carmakers who have invested heavily in a state of confusion, but has also added immense uncertainty to Britain's electric future. Nevertheless, to avoid the complete marginalization of its manufacturing sector, the government has still published a national battery strategy and is using tools like the Automotive Transformation Fund to invest heavily in attracting gigafactory investments. India's Tata Group has announced a £4 billion investment, and Envision AESC will also expand its factory in Sunderland, providing the heart for the future of Jaguar, Land Rover, and Nissan. From stubborn conservatism to policy blunders, from internal labor disputes to chaotic management, the decline of the British auto industry is a mirror reflecting industrial change, globalization, and national strategy. Today, standing at the new crossroads of electrification and intelligence, this old industrial power is betting everything on a new gamble for the future of its auto industry. Can the former king reclaim its crown in this once-in-a-century transformation? History is in the process of giving its answer.